James Robinson straightened his dark blue tie one last time as he walked through the busy London Heathrow Airport. His leather shoes clicked softly against the polished floor as he made his way to Gate 12. The evening rush was in full swing, with travellers hurrying in every direction, pulling their suitcases behind them. As the CEO of Tech Forward Solutions, James had made this journey to New York countless times. His first-class ticket was tucked neatly in his jacket pocket, right next to his platinum frequent flyer card. Tonight should have been just another routine business trip. He had no idea that the next few minutes would change his life forever. The gate area was crowded with passengers waiting to board. James could see the aircraft through the large windows, its lights blinking in the growing darkness outside. He felt relaxed and confident as he approached the boarding desk where a young woman with blonde hair was checking tickets. Emma Collins looked up from her computer screen as James handed her his boarding pass. Her smile faded slightly as she took the ticket from his hands. She stared at it for what seemed like a very long time, her eyes moving back and forth between the paper and James's face. "I'm sorry, sir," Emma said, her voice sounding unsure. "There seems to be some kind of system error with your ticket. Your seat has been reassigned to another passenger." James felt a small knot form in his stomach, but he kept his voice calm and polite. "That's strange. I booked this seat 3 weeks ago. My assistant called yesterday to confirm everything was in order. Could you please check your system again?" Emma's fingers moved quickly over her keyboard, but she shook her head. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do. The seat is no longer available." Tom Henderson, Emma's supervisor, noticed the delay and walked over to the desk. He was a middle-aged man with grey hair and a stern expression. Without even looking at James's boarding pass carefully, he immediately supported Emma's decision. "Sir, we need to keep the boarding process moving," Tom said firmly. "There are many other passengers waiting behind you." James looked round and noticed something that made his heart sink. Other first-class passengers were walking past him without any problems at all. The gate agents barely glanced at their tickets before waving them through. These passengers were all white, and they moved through the process as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "I've been flying first class with this airline for over 12 years," James said quietly, his voice still respectful but firm. "I have platinum status with your frequent flyer program. There must be some kind of mistake here." Emma's voice became sharper and more impatient. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. You're holding up the entire boarding process for everyone else." The situation was becoming more uncomfortable by the minute. James could feel the eyes of dozens of passengers in the waiting area, watching him. Some of them had even pulled out their phones, sensing that something unfair was happening right in front of them. An elderly businessman named Robert Davies, who had been sitting nearby reading a newspaper, stood up and walked over to the desk. His face showed clear concern about what he was witnessing. "Excuse me," Robert said to Emma, his voice polite but firm. "I saw this gentleman check in at the counter earlier. He clearly has a valid first-class ticket. What exactly is the problem?" Here, Emma's face turned bright red. She looked nervous and frustrated at the same time. "Security will handle this matter," she said, reaching for her radio. James felt the weight of every stare in the terminal. Conversations round him had stopped as people watched the drama unfold. Some passengers looked uncomfortable, while others seemed curious about what would happen next. A few people were now openly recording the situation with their phones. Despite the humiliation he was feeling, James stood tall and straight. His dignity remained intact even as the treatment he was receiving became more and more unfair. He had faced challenges before in his life, but this felt different. This felt personal in a way that cut deep into his soul. He knew exactly what was happening to him. This wasn't about system errors or seat assignments. This was about the color of his skin and the assumptions people made because of it. But James also knew that how he handled this moment would determine what came next. After security officers began walking toward the gate, James remained calm and composed. He had spent years building his company and his reputation through hard work and determination. He wasn't going to let this moment break him. This was about to become a moment that would change everything. Not just for James, but for everyone watching. Two security officers in dark uniforms walked quickly toward Gate 12. Michael Brown was tall and serious-looking, while David Wilson was shorter with kind eyes. They had been called to handle what Emma Collins described as a difficult passenger situation. James Robinson watched them approach and made sure his hands were clearly visible at his sides. He knew from experience that any sudden movement or loud voice could make things much worse. His heart was beating fast, but his face remained calm and peaceful. "Good evening, officers," James said in a steady voice. "I'm simply trying to board my flight with my valid first-class ticket. I haven't done anything wrong." He slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his boarding pass and identification. He handed them to Michael Brown with smooth, careful movements. Michael looked at the documents closely, turning them over in his hands. His experienced eyes could spot fake tickets and false identification quickly. After a long moment, he looked up at Emma Collins with a confused expression. "These look completely legitimate to me," Michael said to Emma. "The ticket is real, the identification matches, and everything appears to be in order. What exactly is the problem here?" Emma's face grew red and blotchy. She looked nervous and her voice started to shake. "The system. There was an error in our computer system. His seat was given to someone else." David Wilson frowned and looked round at the other passengers who were now gathering to watch the situation unfold. Many of them had their phones out, recording everything that was happening. The crowd was growing larger by the minute. Robert Davies, the elderly businessman who had spoken up earlier, stepped forward again. His voice was filled with anger and disbelief. "Officers, I've been watching this entire situation from the beginning. This gentleman has been nothing but polite and professional. He's clearly being discriminated against because of his race." More passengers began to nod their heads in agreement. A woman named Margaret Thompson was traveling with her young daughter Lucy. She leaned down and whispered softly to the little girl, "Watch how that man handles himself with such grace and dignity. Sweetheart, that's what true strength looks like." The little girl watched James carefully, seeing how he remained calm even when people were treating him unfairly. She would remember this moment for the rest of her life. James reached into his pocket and pulled out his mobile phone. His movements were slow and deliberate, making sure the security officers could see exactly what he was doing. He looked directly at Emma Collins with steady eyes. "May I have your full name and employee identification number, please?" James asked in a polite but firm voice. Emma's hands began to shake as she realized this was becoming much more serious than she had expected. She stammered out her information, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma Collins, employee number 47,291. James typed the information into his phone with careful precision. The crowd of passengers watched in complete silence, sensing that something important was about to happen. "I'm going to make a phone call now," James announced quietly to everyone around him. "I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding here that needs to be addressed at the highest possible level." Tom Henderson, Emma's supervisor, crossed his arms over his chest and tried to sound authoritative. "Sir, we've already explained the situation to you. There's nothing more we can do." James looked at Tom with calm but determined eyes. "No," he said gently but firmly. "You haven't explained anything. You've created a problem where none existed. Now I'm going to solve it, Michael." Brown and David Wilson exchanged glances. They had handled many difficult situations at the airport, but this felt different. The man in front of them was clearly intelligent, well-spoken, and completely in control of himself. The entire terminal seemed to fall silent as James stepped. A few feet away from the crowd, passengers stopped talking, and even the usual airport announcements seemed to fade into the background. Everyone sensed that whatever phone call James was about to make would change everything. James scrolled through his contacts and found the number he was looking for. His finger hovered over the screen for just a moment before he pressed the call button. Emma Collins watched him nervously, finally beginning to understand that this situation was spiraling far beyond her control. She had no idea who James Robinson really was or what kind of power he might have. All she knew was that a simple gate agent decision was about to become something much bigger. The phone rang once, twice. Then someone answered. James's voice became professional and serious as he began to speak. Nobody in the crowd could hear exactly what he was saying, but they could tell from his tone that this was a very important conversation. Everything was about to change. James Robinson walked slowly away from the crowd of passengers and security officers. He held his phone close to his ear and spoke in a low, professional voice. The people standing nearby could hear the authority and confidence in his tone, even though they couldn't make out all the words. "Hello, Catherine. It's James Robinson," he said into the phone. "I need to speak with you about a very serious incident involving your airline right now." There was a pause as the person on the other end of the line responded. James nodded his head as he listened carefully. "Yes, I'm at gate 12 at Heathrow Airport right now," James continued. "No, I don't think this can wait until tomorrow. I think this requires your immediate attention." The woman James was speaking to was Catherine Phillips, the chief executive officer of the entire airline company. Most people would never have her direct phone number, but James had worked with her through many business partnerships over the years. His company, Tech Forward Solutions, had a £50 million annual contract with the airline for all their corporate travel services. Back at the gate, Emma Collins watched James nervously. More and more passengers were now paying attention to what was happening. The crowd was growing larger, and many people were still recording everything with their phones. A young man named Peter Wright had been sitting in the waiting area reading a book. He stood up and walked over to Tom Henderson, Emma's supervisor. Peter's face showed clear anger about what he had witnessed. "I saw everything that happened here," Peter said firmly to Tom. "This man did absolutely nothing wrong. He's been completely respectful and polite while your staff has treated him terribly." Tom Henderson's face was starting to show signs of real worry. He kept glancing over at James, who was still talking on his phone. Something about James's calm confidence was making Tom feel very uncomfortable. Most passengers who faced this kind of treatment either became angry and started shouting, or they simply gave up and walked away. But James was different. He maintained his composure with the bearing of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. James's voice became slightly louder as he continued his phone conversation. "Catherine, I need you to understand that this isn't just about me personally. This is about how your staff treats people who look like me. This is about the culture you've allowed to develop in your company." Emma Collins strained to hear more of the conversation, Her heart was beginning to race as she realized this situation was becoming much more serious than she had expected. She could see other airport staff members starting to notice the commotion. Word was beginning to spread through the airport communication system that something important was happening at Gate 12. Michael Brown and David Wilson, the two security officers, stood quietly and watched James talk on his phone. They had both been working at the airport for many years and had seen many different situations, but something about this felt different. The man they were dealing with was clearly not an ordinary passenger. Margaret Thompson, the mother with her young daughter, whispered to other passengers round her, "Look at how dignified he is." She said softly, "Even in this terrible situation, he hasn't lost his temper once." Robert Davies, the elderly businessman, nodded his head in agreement. "I've been in business for 40 years, he said quietly. "That man has the presence of someone very important. Those staff members have no idea what they've done." James finished his phone conversation and slowly walked back toward the group. He slid his phone back into his jacket pocket with calm, deliberate movements. His facial expression remained peaceful, but there was a new energy in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "The situation is being handled at the highest level," James announced quietly to everyone round him. "I suggest we all wait here for a few minutes." Tom Henderson felt his confidence beginning to waver. He had been so sure of himself earlier, but now he wasn't certain about anything. "Sir, I don't understand what you mean," he said nervously. James looked directly at Tom with steady eyes. "You will," he replied simply. "Very soon you will understand exactly what has happened here tonight." Emma Collins felt her stomach drop. She had the terrible feeling that she had made a mistake that would change her life forever. The way James spoke suggested that he was someone with real power and influence. The entire gate area had fallen silent. Passengers stopped their conversations and watched the drama unfold. Even the usual airport announcements seemed quieter than normal. Everyone sensed that whatever was about to happen would be something they would remember for a long time. James stood calmly in the center of it all, waiting for what he knew was coming next. The atmosphere at Gate 12 began to change in ways that nobody could have expected. Within just 10 minutes of James's phone call, important people started arriving at the gate area. The first person to appear was Sarah Mitchell, the regional director of the airline. She was practically running through the terminal, her high heels clicking loudly on the floor. Right behind her came Andrew Clark, the airport general manager. Both of them looked extremely worried and concerned as they hurried toward James. Sarah was slightly out of breath when she reached him. "Mr. Robinson," Sarah said, trying to catch her breath, "I am so terribly sorry about what has happened here tonight. We've just been informed about the entire situation." The passengers who had been watching the drama unfold for the past 30 minutes began to whisper among themselves. They could see that something very important was happening. The people who had been treating James badly were now being treated badly themselves. Emma Collins stood completely frozen in place. Her face was white as a sheet, and her hands were shaking. She was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what she had done. This wasn't just any ordinary passenger she had refused to help. This was someone very powerful and important. Tom Henderson's face had gone completely pale. He looked like he might be sick to his stomach. All of his earlier confidence had disappeared, and he now looked scared and worried. Andrew Clark turned to address the crowd of passengers who had gathered to watch. "Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely apologize for the delay and the inconvenience. We're working to resolve this situation immediately." James maintained his calm and dignified composure, just as he had throughout the entire ordeal. "I appreciate your quick response. He said to Sarah and Andrew, "But this isn't just about me getting on a plane. This is about how your staff treated a paying customer based on nothing more than assumptions about who I am." Suddenly, a phone rang loudly. Sarah Mitchell pulled out her mobile phone and answered it quickly. The voice on the other end was clear and authoritative. "Put me on speakerphone," the voice said. "I want everyone to hear this." Sarah held up her phone so that everyone in the gate area could hear clearly. The voice belonged to Catherine Phillips, the chief executive officer of the entire airline company, Mr. Robinson. Catherine's voice came through the speaker. "I am personally mortified by what has happened to you tonight. This behavior is completely unacceptable and goes against everything our company claims to stand for." The crowd of passengers watched in complete amazement as the situation completely reversed itself. What had started as discrimination against James had now become a situation where the most powerful people in the airline were apologizing to him personally. Robert Davies, the elderly businessman who had first spoken up for James, leaned over to Margaret Thompson and whispered, "I've never seen anything like this in my entire life." That man's dignity never wavered, not even once. Margaret nodded her head in agreement. "My daughter will never forget what she saw here tonight," she whispered back. "She learned what real strength looks like." Emma Collins was quietly approached by two security officers. They spoke to her in low voices and then escorted her away from the gate area. Her employment status was now under serious review, and she might lose her job completely. Tom Henderson faced similar consequences for his role in the discrimination. Another supervisor arrived to take his place, and he too was led away by security. Personnel. James looked round at the crowd of passengers who had witnessed everything. Many of them were still recording with their phones, and he knew that this story would spread far beyond the airport. "I want everyone here to understand something very important," James said in a clear, strong voice. "This isn't about power or position. This isn't about who I am or what company I work for. This is about basic human dignity." He paused and looked round at all the faces watching him. "Every single person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of how they look or where they come from. What happened here tonight should never happen to anyone." The passengers began to applaud. They were moved by James's grace under pressure and his message of dignity and respect. Even after being treated so badly, he was using this moment to teach others about fairness and kindness. Peter Wright, the young man who had spoken up earlier, started clapping loudly. Soon the entire gate area was filled with applause. People were not just clapping for James, but for the lesson he had taught them about maintaining dignity in difficult situations. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward. "Mr. Robinson, we want to make this right, not just for you, but for everyone." James nodded his head thoughtfully. This was just the beginning of something much bigger. 3 weeks after the incident at Gate 12, James Robinson walked into a large conference room at the airline's main headquarters in London. The room was packed with people from every level of the company. There were senior executives in expensive suits, regular staff members in their uniforms, and diversity consultants with thick folders full of notes. But James wasn't there for revenge or to file lawsuits. He was there to help create something much more important than punishment. He was there to help transform the entire airline company. "We have a real opportunity here," James said as he stood at the front of the room. "We can turn what happened to me into something positive that benefits everyone who works for this company and everyone who flies with this airline." Catherine Phillips, the CEO, sat at the head of the long conference table. She nodded her head as James spoke. "Mr. Robinson has agreed to work with us to implement real change," she said to the room. "This isn't just about writing new policies and rules. This is about changing hearts and minds." The changes that James negotiated with the airline were comprehensive and far-reaching. Every single employee of the airline would undergo sensitivity training to help them understand bias and discrimination. A new reporting system would be established so that passengers could report unfair treatment, and this system would be overseen by people outside the company to make sure it was fair. Most importantly, James created something called the Dignity in Travel Scholarship Fund. This fund would support young people from underrepresented communities who wanted to pursue careers in aviation. It would help them pay for a flight school, get internships, and find jobs in the airline industry. Emma Collins, the gate agent who had originally refused to help James, was given a second chance after completing sensitivity training and doing community service. She had learned from her mistake and became one of the program's most passionate supporters. She used her own experience to help train other employees about the importance of treating everyone with raise. Robert Davies, the elderly businessman who had first spoken up for James at the airport, reached out to him personally after hearing about the scholarship fund. "You've shown me what real leadership looks like," he told James during a phone conversation. "I want to contribute money to your scholarship fund to help more young people." The incident at Gate 12 had been recorded by many passengers on their phones. The videos were shared widely on social media and news websites across the country. The story sparked important conversations about bias and privilege in workplaces everywhere. But instead of focusing on the negative aspects of what had happened, James used all the attention to promote positive change. Margaret Thompson's young daughter Lucy, who had witnessed the entire event, wrote James a heartfelt letter. "You showed me that being strong doesn't mean being loud or angry," she wrote in her careful handwriting. "Thank you for teaching me about dignity and how to treat people with respect." James kept the letter on his desk at work. It reminded him that even children could learn important lessons about fairness and kindness from watching how adults handle difficult situations. 6 months after the incident, James boarded the same flight route from London to New York. He walked up to the gate with his first-class boarding pass, just as he had done many times before. But this time, everything was different. The staff at the gate treated him with respect and professionalism. They smiled genuinely and processed his ticket quickly and efficiently. But James knew they weren't treating him well just because they recognized him from the incident. They were treating him well because they had learned to treat everyone with dignity and respect. The airline's culture had genuinely transformed. The sensitivity training had worked. The new policies were being followed. Most importantly, the hearts and minds of the employees had changed. As James settled into his seat and the plane prepared for a takeoff, he looked out the window at the lights of London below. He reflected on the incredible journey from humiliation to transformation that had brought him to this moment. What had started as one of the most challenging and embarrassing moments of his life had become a force for a positive change that would benefit countless people for years to come. Young people would get scholarships to pursue their dreams in aviation. Employees would learn to treat everyone fairly. Passengers would travel with dignity and respect. James smiled as the plane lifted off into the night sky. He had turned his pain into purpose and his struggle into strength. The incident at Gate 12 had changed everything. But in the best possible way, this was what real victory looked like.